Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hey, just a quick note. I recorded this interview well over a year ago, and in the interim, Lacey is now going by Tilly Storm. So I apologize for any confusion about the name, but it's still a really valuable interview, and I hope you enjoy it. Hey, it's Jessa. Welcome back to another episode of the Better Sex Podcast. So glad you're here. I really am grateful for all of you who are listening, and I hope that you are getting value out of the show. I'm trying to come up with really interesting topics and helpful topics and things that are, things that address things that are super common, but also episodes that are about things that are really rare, but important to know about should you ever be one of the people that needs the information, right? So today I'm sort of revisiting a topic that I have touched on with some other guests. This one puts it together a little bit differently. We are talking about sexual shame, sex negativity, how that means you get kind of stuck in your head and perhaps lose desire and really limit pleasure in sex. So my guest today is Lacey Broussard, and she is a sexual coach who really helps women who are feeling no desire, who have been shut down by shame and negativity, to really reclaim their sexuality, to recreate their narratives, to get in touch with their body, to get out of their head and really experience, what she would describe as sort of infinite levels of pleasure, more and more pleasure, more than they possibly thought they could have. So I think you're going to take something useful from the episode, no matter where you are in the sex negativity continuum, because all of us have some things that we could let go. So hope you find it useful and enjoy it. And before we start the show today, it is sponsored by Intimacy with Ease. It's a method to help otherwise happy couples achieve a sex life that is easy and fun for both of them, so that you can actually just enjoy your sex life with zero stress. For more information, if you want to watch a brief little training video that's available, all of that, go to intimacywithease.com. So Lacey, thanks so much for being with me today.
Yeah, absolutely. So excited to be here.
Yeah. So why don't you just tell the listeners a little bit about you, and how you got into the work that you're doing. What drew you into this?
Yeah, sure. I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana. I grew up in the suburbs here in a very conservative religious environment. And I was shamed a lot around my body and my sexuality growing up. And when I had my first baby at 23, I had a home birth, and it was a really amazing experience. And I quickly realized that everything I'd been taught about my body and sex and pleasure was just a crock of bullshit.
Really? As part of the birth?
Yeah. So when a lot of women are like losing touch with that part of themselves after becoming a mom, I actually was discovering that part of myself. So it was more of like a birth in reverse for me.
Interesting.
And that kind of took me off on a path of recognizing that a lot of women struggle with sexuality after having kids. And I found a course that, taught all about sex, love, relationship coaching and specializing in that area and ancient tantric wisdom and Taoist practices. And I started doing the work on myself first, and I just had this amazing experience of being able to reclaim my sexuality for me, my body for me, and releasing all the shame and guilt I grew up with. And then hence becoming a sex coach years later. So
yeah.
Yeah.
So could you talk a little bit about, you said you grew up in a conservative place, right? Like what was the kind of sex negativity, and not just that you experienced, but when you talk to clients and stuff, how does this show up? What are the kinds of thoughts that people come in and maybe haven't questioned?
Yeah, well, it shows up with men and women, actually. Most of my clients really relate to that part of my story. So I have had, like, I was just raised conservative Christian, like it was just a Southern Baptist church, but some of my clients were raised like non-denomination. I have ex-Mormons, ex-Jehovah's Witness, like all sorts of people really identify with that if they grew up that way too. So they're really seeking for support and help, because what has happened for a lot of them is the shame and the guilt that we carry around our sexuality will often shut down our desire for sex at some point in a person's life, because these are extremely, extremely low vibe emotions, and they often create a shame body. It's like almost like an energy suck, right? And it's like it sucks all of your sexuality right out of you. So I get a lot of women that lack desire. So that's what I primarily work with, is women that lack desire, and they often have a history of a lot of sexual shame and body issues. And what I found is that's one of the big reasons is the shame. And then for men, it's usually exists or manifest as some sort of addictive thing around sex or porn, or, just being really out of their body and sexuality, because being in their body and sexuality is like really scary for them because they're not okay with it because there's so much shame around it.
Okay, so in general, you're saying men, rather than lose desire, they start enacting it in some other way, where women maybe stifle it or disconnect from it or something. I mean, I sort of try to avoid generalizations, but, in general, that's what you're saying.
Exactly. Well, what happens is that the shame, if you got raised with that around sexuality, what happens is that registers in your body as a trauma. And our responses to trauma out of our window of tolerance are like, we either go into hypo response or a hyper response. And lack of desire is a hypo response.
Okay.
And defiance, like sexual deviance, like you go out and sleep with a ton of people or you watch of insane porn, that is a hyper response to deal with a trauma that you don't know how to deal with.
You're right, where you can't stay in the grounded middle, where you're connected and embodying and okay.
So most women will go into the hypo. They don't want it at all. Most men will go into the defiance and, just do all sorts of crazy things.
Interesting. The way you're talking, it sounds, what you were listing is a lot of the reasons for the sexual shame come from sort of religious training. Is there anything you want to say about other places that people might have, come into sex negativity or shame that maybe aren't based in churches or religion?
Yeah, absolutely. STDs, STIs, unwanted pregnancies. I've worked with clients who became moms very young. I had one that was like 21 years old and became a mom at 16, and the shame that she had wrapped around that, oh my goodness, like that's a huge thing. So it's just our cultural conditioning as well. It's not just religion. Our culture shames us for having STDs, STIs, getting pregnant. And there's just, that's all over the place. It's not just the church.
Right. Yeah. And I'm also thinking about clients that are ashamed of what turns them on, ashamed of their own eroticism or their own sexual desires. And, that can also be, I guess it could be religious, but also cultural. The idea that somehow this fantasy I have must mean I'm bad.
Yeah. I actually I did a whole podcast on sexual fantasies too. And a lot of the fantasies that we have, like, they're not a problem unless they make you feel bad.
Right. Yeah, I know. And a lot of people do so much of the time. I don't know what the percentages are or something, but the things that we fantasize about and find erotic are so different than who we are in real life. And so it can feel like this must be a problem, right? I know a lot of people have shame around that.
Totally. Yes.
Yeah. So you're saying in your own personal story, it was your birth story is sort of what opened up to your own sexuality and challenging your beliefs. Like, I guess the choice to have a home birth and the empowerment of that, was that sort of how that connected?
It's actually an unassisted birth.
Yeah.
I did not want anyone there. I had this inner knowing that that's what I needed to do. And I wouldn't advise anybody to go off and do that, but it's just something that I knew for me, it was the right thing. And I had to go with that. I literally had not an ounce of fear. I don't know why. I don't know why that was gifted to me. And I look back at the experience and realize that absolutely must have happened the way that it did in order for me to wake up.
I guess the way I'm hearing that is that was your first experience of an inner knowing about your body, right? And in some ways, your sexuality, birth is somewhat of a sexual event, and when did you know that like a week before the baby or 8 months before the baby? Like, it seems like there would have been a window of time in there where you were starting to come into your own.
Well, I actually went to college to become an OBGYN. But I never got into med school. So
okay.
Yeah, I had trained with an anesthesiologist who I followed around in the hospital and did a lot of C-sections with it, or I didn't. I just watched him do it, administer the drugs in a C-section. And I watched all of these women give birth and they were so out of it. And I was like, well, if I ever get pregnant, I want nothing of this sort of experience, and nothing against C-sections at all. Like, they totally save lives. It's great. Right. But for me, I was just like, okay, if there were any way that I could avoid that happening to me, I would like that. Yes, please. I didn't want that kind of experience. So when I got pregnant, I did some childbirth ed classes and was just like, I feel that my body absolutely knows how to do this. And I just know that I don't need anyone there. Like, this experience I knew it would change my life. And I knew that's how I had to do it. And I can't explain how I knew that, except I just did. That there was literally not an ounce of fear. Everyone was like, well, weren't you afraid? I'm like, no, I wasn't.
Right.
I wasn't afraid.
Okay. But that makes me think you had 7 or 8 months of this knowing. Did that even across all those months before the baby came, did that start to change your sex life? How did that start to affect the shame and the negativity that you had until then?
So it started with the body and trusting my body that it knew what it was doing and that it wasn't inherently wrong or bad. And even though I'm a tall, skinny, strawberry blonde person, like, I had some mega body issues. I mean, I look back at pictures at the time and I'm like, what was I thinking? Like, almost like body distortion or whatever. I felt bigger and fatter than I was, and I'm not at all, it's just like the way that I viewed myself was so off. And so coming back to, right mind around my body was the first thing. And then it took several years before I found the jade egg practice. So that's an ancient Taoist practice that I teach all my female clients, where you take an egg-shaped stone made out of 100% knee-fried jade, and you use it internally, and you do different squeezes and releases and breathwork practices with it. And it's basically like yoga for your vagina.
Okay.
And it has the benefit of just really connecting you to your body, to paying attention to what's down there, to increase the sensitivity, and helping you to become more connected to your pussy. And that's what I was so disconnected from. I think that was probably like 5 years after my first baby was born that I found that practice. And that was the practice that helped me release all of my sexual shame and guilt. Because I'd heard that's like one thing that people had experienced around doing a jade egg practice. And I was like, oh my God, yes, please. Like, I need to not feel shame around my sexuality, because I felt so closed off. Like, I couldn't express myself sexually. I had fine orgasms and never had a problem with desire. Like, my orgasms were fine. And I didn't really think anything was wrong, but I just felt kind of shut down. Like if we tried a new position that was different, like, I would freak out a little bit. Or, like if things got a little kinky or weird, I would feel so uncomfortable, so uncomfortable. I was like, I don't want to feel that way. And I knew it was because of shame and not being fully expressed in my sexuality. And then the jade egg practice, I did that after about 2 months. I woke up one day like in that half awake, half asleep state. And I just felt all of that shame just like leave.
Wow.
and I just never felt another ounce of sexual shame ever since that day.
Do you feel like that's what happens with most of your clients too? That it's like all in a moment that it fades away? Or do some people have a more gradual, like, oh wait, now that I look, it's gone?
It's Jessa here, just taking a quick break. Thanks for listening. Are you interested in being a guest on the show? I'm always looking for people with expertise to share that could enrich other people's sex lives. And I'm also interested in hearing from people who have transformed their own intimate relationship and would want to share their story with my listeners. So if you've got something to contribute to the discussion and want to see about being featured on an upcoming episode, please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, and check out the Be a Guest details. You'll find everything you need there.
Yeah, I think it's more of a gradual thing for most people that I work with people usually for 6 months. So it takes time to undo the narratives that we were taught.
Yeah.
And it takes even more time sometimes to release it from your body.
Yeah.
We can store all of the negative beliefs we have around sexuality and pleasure and orgasm in our deep primal limbic brains, right? And the unconscious part of our brains. And that's why sexuality healing and sexuality work is so important, because you can't really just talk about it and fix it, right?
Right.
When people go to counselors for problems in their marriage, but when it's really centered around sex in their marriage, it doesn't really work because they're only addressing it on a thinking level, which isn't where sexuality problems stem from.
Right. I mean, I tell my clients that all the time, right? It's not going to change sitting in here on the couch talking to me.
No.
That insight can be useful, but you guys have to go home and have different experiences, right? Change is only going to happen through experience.
Yeah. And working on your body as well, because your body is like a sponge and it holds on to all of those beliefs. So you got to get rid of that.
Right. So how do you approach getting out of your head, getting away from those sex negative thoughts and spirals, and what are some of the techniques that you work with clients?
Yeah.
That you use?
Well, I like to start out with helping them release it without having to know the story behind it all, right? Because like I said, when it comes to sexual healing, and it might sound a little taboo to say that word, but when it comes to sexual healing, it's you don't need to understand or to go and dig into the past and all of the junk around past to heal it. All you need to do is to feel it.
Mm-hmm.
What I teach them right off the bat is transformational breath work. And it's also a gentle trauma release method to release the tension and the trauma in their body, to just feel the stuckness in their body. So if I can get them into feeling how stuck they are, and then just teach them the breathwork practice to release that stuckness, it generally blows them open. And then from there, I'll take it to more of a cortical level. So I have them rewrite their sexual narrative. So I just say, okay, if you were raised in the most sex positive environment ever, with just parents that completely celebrated your sexuality, that taught you that the more sexual you are, the more orgasms you had, the closer you'd be to God. If that were the case, what would your new narrative be? And I have them write it out and then record it as a meditation. And I make them listen to it for 10 days in a row.
Huh. Do you get resistance to that?
Oh, yeah. It's really challenging for most people to even think about what it would be like to have been raised in a sex positive environment, because
they don't know what they don't know, right? I'm sure they.
Yeah. Well, by the time they work with me, they know that there's something more, but they're not.
Yeah.
What it is, but they're like, wait, that girl got something. I don't know what she got. So they know there's more, but yeah, it's often a little intangible until I make them sit down and think about it.
Yeah.
So I give them a list of all different aspects of their sexuality to think about.
Like what?
What it means to have orgasms. What would you have been taught about orgasms? What would you have been taught about your gender identity and your sexuality? Because maybe I've had one that was so repressed from religion that she was actually a lesbian and married to a man, and she could not admit to that until years and years later. What is it that you would have been taught about menstruation, about birth, about menopause? What would you have been taught about men and pleasure if you had been raised in a sex positive?
Yeah. Masturbation, right? What would you have been taught about self-pleasure? And
self-pleasure is a big one, because most of us got shamed really, really early on if we touched ourselves as little kids, or if we were caught in the tub touching ourselves. That's such a common story I hear. It's almost happened to everyone I've worked with, where they remember at some point being shamed for touching themselves.
Yeah.
So rewriting that narrative is a huge piece to it.
And does that usually happen over the course of weeks or months? I mean, I can't imagine in between two different visits, they've got that whole thing sort of reimagined. That seems to me like that would be quite a process.
Right. No. Well, obviously we work with other things. We work with inner child dynamics. So what did your inner child get taught about sex, orgasm, pleasure, all of that? And inner child is gosh, man, that is running your relationship. If you have not done trauma release work or worked on your inner child extensively, I guarantee you your inner child is showing up in your relationship. And it's probably one of the biggest reasons why you're not happy in your relationship. So doing inner child dynamics and working to meet the inner child's needs so that it stops showing up and being triggered all of the time by your partner. You know, that conversation you get in with your partner every single time, that conversation, promise you that's because there's some inner child piece inside of you that didn't get its needs met and is being triggered by your partner like crazy. And your inner child is like, love me, I need attention. So that's a big piece. And then our mother-father dynamics is a really big piece, what we got taught from our parents, obviously. But instead of holding on to that, letting go of that, like we're all adults now. We get to choose what we believe. So empowering a new identity to come from, like empowering your own inner masculine and your own inner feminine and sexuality instead of like carrying the beliefs that you adopted from your parents. Like question that, you know, question how that's affecting your sexuality and your relationship, because I guarantee you it is. If you haven't questioned it's affecting you, right? And usually a negative way.
So talk to me a little bit then about how you work with people to expand their pleasure, basically. You know, if the shame can drop away, if they can be present, if they can embrace like, wow, this whole thing could be different than I've ever thought before or experienced before. What are some of the practices that you use with people?
Yeah, well, helping them to get out of their head is one of the biggest pieces. And I like to take people really deep. And one of my favorite type of clients to start working with is someone who has done some meditation and yoga before, because then I know, okay, cool. They've learned a little bit about how to get out of their head to start. And then I can take them super deep into becoming multi-orgasmic if they want, because it's easier. But sometimes I get clients that are just so in their head all the time. The first thing I have to teach them is how to stop those thoughts and what to do. And well, I say stop the thoughts. It's not about stopping the thoughts. It's just about noticing them and becoming okay with them. So one of the ways that I do that is with the jade egg practice, because it's giving them an actual practice to do. And I'm giving their mind a job. So it's not just like sitting there being like, okay, I'm on my to-do list while I'm doing this practice. And yes, some of that happens while even when they're doing the jade egg practices. But that practice, I'm giving them their mind the job of following pleasure. So they're constantly asking, where's the pleasure at? Where is the pleasure at? If I squeeze this way, if I squeeze that way, there's 16 muscle groups in your pelvic floor. Like we only think of the pelvic floor and what we can experience orgasm wise is just like a clitoral orgasm and a Kegel exercise. There is so much more to feel down there. It is not even funny. There's so many more orgasms that you can have than just a clitoral orgasm. So just touching yourself, taking the time every day. I give them tons of tools and meditations and jade egg practices, breathwork practices, and guided self-pleasure practices to do so they get in a daily habit of coming back to the body, getting out of their head. They're rewarded all day for being in their head at their job. It's like, no, okay, cool. You can be in your head there, but we got to teach you how to switch gears, because you can't drop, being the super powered woman and, at work and then come home and all of a sudden feel like you can be this sexy, sensual goddess again and have sex with your husband without like some sort of transition. So the practices that I give them are meant to help them get in the habit of making that transition every single day, from being all up in their head all day to, okay, what's it like to just let myself feel? What's it like to like come back to my body and just be in my body? So it happens over time. I don't work with people who want quick fixes, because you don't get one in sexuality work. You gotta put in the time, baby.
Right. Well, especially when the stuff builds up for so long, the history's so long, it takes a while to get there. So, and you said you work with a lot of people around 6 months, something like that. What's the sign that they're done with the work with you? Like, when do they graduate or realize, wait, I got it from here?
Well, most of them get their original goals. So we work around goals of working together. What do they want in the 6 months that we have to work together? Most of them get it before we're done. But what I always tell them is it's usually around week 6, 7, the 6th or 7th session that we're doing where they're starting to have the breakthroughs. And then, it's a 12-session program. So they're a little bit about halfway. And then it's getting them to a place of empowerment. So we've got to break through all of the junk and feel all of the junk, right? And then it's and you can heal all of this in pleasure. It doesn't have to suck either. Mm-hmm. This is what I like to tell my clients. It doesn't some awful, grueling process. I'm not it's actually going to be fun. Come on, I'm giving you homework.
Right. It's not the worst homework in the world, right? Yeah.
It's not that bad. But yeah, usually around halfway through, they're experiencing huge shifts and breakthroughs, and they have gotten to a place of empowerment, usually around week 8, 9, 10. And then by then, I'm just teaching them the next level of it. Okay. Mm-hmm. There's always more pleasure. Pleasure is literally infinite in your body. Your body's capacity for pleasure is very limited because how often do you go around asking yourself, what should I do today that feels really good? And then just do it. Never, because obligation, because kids, because money, because family, because work, we have all those things. But there's always another level that you can go to expand your pleasure capacity. So if I can get someone from not wanting to have sex at all to being on the brink of divorce because she hasn't had sex with her husband in a year, to actually having sex regularly at least once a month, then that's a huge win for her.
Right.
And that's usually happening about halfway in. Yeah. And then just from there, it gets better and better and better. So opening her up to not just wanting sex, but to the ability to have more pleasure, to have different types of orgasm, to more intimately connect with their partner. So for my partner people, I'm always giving them communication and connection practices too.
Yeah.
So they can deepen their intimacy and connection, because that's the thing that turns women on the most anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. So would you just say a little bit about where people can find you? If you've got, I don't know if you only work with people that are in New Orleans, with you, if you work remotely, but anyway, a little bit more about what you've got to offer and how they could get in touch.
Yeah, no, I work with people all over the world, although I do have lots of local clients. I do have a lot of clients elsewhere. But yeah, my website is the multiorgasmicmama.com. It's spelled MAMA. And everything about my programs is on there. The applications to work with me is on there.
Okay. I'll put that link in the show notes too, so people can easily find it. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get-to-know-you and question and answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.